Welcome to some new r/malicious compliance stories, where people comply to the letter, but not the spirit of a request. I hope you had a great day. But first, thank you for subscribing to the channel and for all those likes. Today we have 3 great stories, so let's get right into them. Shari. The first story is called Malicious Compliance as a Training Method. Back in my days working as a paramedic, I spent some time in the training school teaching clinical skills to new staff. We also had a driving section where we trained staff in response driving and also trained up new trainers. One of the issues you find in teaching people to drive at speed is the red mist problem. Things are happening really fast and your attention narrows. This can be quite dangerous. This is something the driving instructors see when they have staff driving at high speeds. One of the consequences is that the student drivers focus closely on what they are asked to do and follow instructions literally to the letter. When training new instructors, the senior instructors apply very specific malicious compliance, or as they call it, puppet driving. The idea is the senior instructors drive and interprets the student instructor's instructions exactly. The student instructor has to think very carefully about the instructions the driver is given. One example of this is the student instructor wants the driver to accelerate. If they say, put your foot down, then the senior instructor will accelerate the vehicle as fast as they can along the road. If the student instructor then says, whoa, slow down, then the senior instructor will hit the brakes hard and carry out an emergency stop. Teaches you to think about what you are saying. The best story we heard of this was a chap who was really doing well in his instructor training, but sometimes didn't think too carefully about what he asked. The senior instructor took 3 trainees out to work on corners and bends. This is all about smooth transitions with careful road positioning on entering a bend, understanding the apex and where to accelerate on leaving the bend. The senior instructor was playing the part of a driver not getting the idea and was making jerky transitions and positioning the car badly. They were following a civilian who was taking a really nice line in the bends, so the trainee instructor said, follow their line. So the senior instructor followed the instructions exactly. The drive was out in Lincolnshire in the UK, a flat county, few hills, fast roads and some nice corners and bends. The car in front was moving quite quickly and the senior instructor was doggedly following that line through the bends. That was right up to the point where the civilian misjudged a bend and went a foot or so off onto the verge. They held the car and got back on the road. The senior instructor followed the instructions he was given exactly and followed the line onto the verge. The driving school car was bigger and heavier, and so it didn't go back on the road, it went a little further off the road. The other thing about Lincolnshire is there are some really nice houses, and this was the case at this bend. There was a very nice house, and in front of it was an immaculate front lawn. It could be described as a bowling green, perfectly mown with those stripes you see and surrounded by a border of cottage garden plants. Into this idyllic setting came the driving school car. A ton and a half of V6 powered metal traveling at 60 miles per hour. The senior instructor braked hard, pulled the wheel around, floored the accelerator and aimed back at the road, carving a pair of deep ruts in the lawn as it went. As the car got back on the road, the trainee instructor yelled, stop, and sure enough an emergency stop followed with skid marks and clouds of smoke. At this point the senior instructor turned to the student instructor and said, okay, how could you have worded your instructions differently? The next story is called Always Pay Attention. Once upon a time, many moons ago, I was but a lowly peon project engineer. I was working on a big $1 million project that my company was contracted to do for the client corp. That was a part of a larger project by the client corp. Things were progressing well, we had the job design and engineering done, materials ordered, ready to mobilize the team to the job site. All of a sudden the client, Bob, says unto us peons, "Hark yeah, your project will now be cancelled because the project will be cancelled." All the work we'd put in up to that point basically just went up in smoke. Even with cancellation fees, that kind of just barely covered the costs we'd incurred to date, no profit. We were now stuck with a huge amount of materials that we'd had to find a way to redeploy with a shelf life. And we knew that claiming cancellation fees was going to be a painful, thorny path. Boy oh boy, was it a truly painful and thorny path to walk indeed. So my team and boss put together the supporting documents etc. and prepared the job cancellation invoice. They then appointed me as the sacrificial lamb bearer of the cancellation invoice to deliver the news to the client corp. Bob was not happy. The negotiation started with Bob, his bosses, Adam, my boss and me in the room. Barely 10 minutes in and there's raised voices, palms slamming on the table, angry men all around. Adam and I tried our best to placate the client's team to no avail. even as they tried whatever intimidation tactics they could to bully us into dropping the cancellation fees. We'd worked out a few options beforehand to be more flexible in this, but all were shut down by Bob's team in anger. Finally, Adam said the magic words. This cancellation clause is written into the master contract with MaliciousCompliance. If you don't agree to this, then perhaps we can escalate to MaliciousCompliance's higher management for arbitration. The room fell silent. Obviously, Bob's team already had a lot of foul-smelling substances on their plate with the failure of the larger project as a whole. Their subsidiary organization was formed as a special purpose company just for this project. The last thing they needed was more attention from the parent organization. Cue MaliciousCompliance. Fine, says Bob. You know what, we'll pay you the cancellation fee. 50% of the purchase order value as stated in the contract. Bob's face took on a sinister smirk, but we'll need to adjust the purchase order value. And with that, Adam and I got booted out of the office. The very next day, my company accounts department started screaming. Apparently, the client had indeed adjusted the purchase order value from the original X million dollars down to $10,000. That meant that the cancellation fee, going by the letter of the contract, was now only $5,000. Jesus, talk about a low blow. But wait, there's more. All subsequent attempts to reach out to Bob and his team by phone or email were stonewalled. Finally, after a few days, I personally paid Bob a visit at his office, only to have him laugh in my face and basically say, "What you gonna do about it?" Other follow-up meeting requests to Bob and his team were denied outright for a couple of weeks. Finally, Adam pulled some strings to have our company's senior management talk to MaliciousCompliance's senior management. After that, we got to meet with an entirely different team than before. Enter Charlie. Charlie was on a different part of the team from Bob, and we hadn't had any dealings with him before. Charlie told us that Bob had been transferred back to MaliciousCompliance HQ. Client Corp was being disbanded, and now Charlie had to take over from Bob. Charlie also had no idea of what had transpired before this, so we filled him in. You see, Bob had pulled a fast MaliciousCompliance on us. He knew he was being transferred back to HQ, so he tried to screw us over, and also made it look like the project cancellation costs were smaller than what they actually are. To give Charlie due credit, he did try to help us resolve the cancellation fees. The only problem is, with the stunt that Bob had pulled just before leaving, we were collectively stuck in cesspit. You see, in order to correct the purchase order to the original correct value, it needed to be verified by the originator of said purchase order, Bob, who was no longer around. And it had to be approved by a manager, Bob's boss, who was also no longer around. To make things worse, since the larger project had been cancelled, finance and accounting functions were now taken over by MaliciousCompliance's finance team, who had no idea of the backstory. And a boatload of suspicion as to why the purchase order now has to be retroactively increased after project cancellation in order to facilitate cancellation fee payments to a supplier. By a huge amount, no less. What do you mean you need to increase the purchase order amount from 10,000 to X million after the fact? We need to get verification from the originator and approver to proceed. All in the midst of a corporate reshuffle within MaliciousCompliance Corp, which meant we had to deal with a rotating cast of different people who again had no idea of the backstory to all this. Fun times. All in all, it took us a year of painful back and forth explanations and negotiations, often repeating the same story to multiple senior managers, multiple parties. There were accusations of fraud and some creative negotiations. They included transfers of inventory to the parent company MaliciousCompliance to support some of the other projects. This in turn messed with our company's other projects with MaliciousCompliance. Meanwhile, just dealing with all this meant that effectively I couldn't be reassigned to other projects because dealing with this became a full-time job in itself. Thus went one of the most stressful and unproductive years of my career, and also an abject lesson in personal and professional integrity. Please don't do this to your suppliers. And always pay attention to the cancellation clauses in your contracts. The last story is called We Are Family Here. I used to work third shift at a carpet warehouse in Georgia. This area is known as the carpet capital of the world. I worked as a lift truck driver at a distribution center. Our main job was to receive rolls of carpet from the manufacturing site, cut them down to order length and ship them back out or put them back in the warehouse. The company had an expected production rate of 350 rolls counted over the course of a night. As long as you met production, there was no issue. If you worked at a consistent rate without overloading and had no issues, you could make 400 to 425 rolls. Occasionally, you did have issues actually finding the particular order in a warehouse with thousands of carpet rolls. The company system had a computer system that told you what roll to get next and where to take it. If you happen to not scan a roll within 15 minutes, it would send an alert to the supervisors, who would then get on a golf cart to go looking for you. I was consistently pulling 400 plus rolls per night, as I would take short breaks, as I was never hungry and would get sleepy. After about a year of this, 10 minutes before the break, I was having trouble finding a roll. As soon as break hit, I stopped looking and went into the break. This would easily take about 10 minutes just to get there. Once the break was done, I was back to looking for my roll. By this point, it was another 10 minutes to find it. This was added to the 10 minutes before the break that I could find it. By the time I was pulling my roll off the bin, the manager had shown up in his golf cart. He just gave me a dead stare and took off. By the time I took it to the central location, my boss was waiting there with a write-up in hand. He asked me to get off my lift truck and follow him to the office. He told me that this was because I took more than 15 minutes to pull a roll and didn't skip it. This was a slap in the face as far as I was concerned. From that point on, I never ever did more than a few more rolls than the required production rate. I would carry a clipboard and count my tally for the night. About a month or so of my not exceeding my production, I get called up to the office one night, and this is how the conversation went. "Hey boss, what's up? Come on in, take a seat." "I'm fine standing. What's up? Come on in, take a seat. Is something going on? I need to get back to get my night's production." "Well, don't worry about that. We won't count today against you." "Okay, what's up? Is everything okay? Are you doing alright at home?" I was visibly confused. "I'm fine. What is this about?" "I'm not just a boss. We are family. And it's my responsibility as a boss to make sure that everyone is okay. The reason I called you up is because you have had a sudden drop in production about a month ago, and we were wondering if you had some family issues going on." "No, my production is where the company expects it to be." "I'm not saying that it's not. You were one of the few employees that could get over 400 rolls a night. And now you are barely getting production. But it's 350, right? Yes, you are meeting production. But you would do over 400 rolls a night, and as a team, your additional rolls would help out your other team members who were struggling." "Wait, you were using my roll count to go towards someone else? Why was I never given part of the paycheck? That's not how this goes. We are a team, and we have a collective production rate that is a team requirement." I was giving an internal sigh. "We have some teammates who have slower equipment or have trouble with hand-eye coordination, and your additional rolls would help them with their roll count towards the collective department production rate." "Okay, so what do you want me to do about it?" "As far as I'm concerned, the company requires 350. And that is what I am doing, right? Can you tell me why it is that you dropped all of a sudden?" "Fine, let me take a seat." I pulled out my wallet and started to pull out the signed write-up that he gave me a month ago. I slid it over to him. My plan was coming to fruition, as I somehow felt that this moment would come somehow. "What's this?" "This is a write-up that you gave me a month ago. Do you remember? That night I had already met my 350 production requirement. I was stuck on a roll 10 minutes before my break and took another 10 to 12 minutes after the break. That night I already had my 350 rolls. Do you remember?" The boss made a surprised face. "After you wrote me up that night, when I already had more than my expected production, why would I ever want to give you more than I have to? Do you really not remember this?" It's a good thing that I held onto this. "Huh?" Then there was silence. Then I asked, "Will that be it? Can I go back to doing my work?" "Go ahead." And with that, we end today's video. Let me know what you think about the stories. On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate the stories and today's video? I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you have a great day. Stay safe. Bye bye.